We're going to look this morning at verses 16 through to 19, which really are God's curse upon man and upon creation as a result of man's sin there at the beginning. Whenever we hear the word curse today, there are different thoughts that come to our mind. We either think of someone who is uncontrollably angry and cursing and using foul language. Or we will think of a witch doctor or a sorcerer who is placing a curse upon someone that they have a spite against, or doing that on behalf of someone else. But whenever we read about God's curse here on man and on creation in these verses before us, we must be very clear that this is not referring to God being uncontrollably angry, or working magic or charm on someone that he has a spite against. There's nothing to do with that. But rather what we are looking at here is the holy, righteous, sovereign God of the universe carrying out his righteous judgment upon man who has just sinned and rebelled against him. That's what we're looking at here in these verses. The righteous judgment of an infinitely righteous and holy God. And as Abraham said, shall not the judge of all the earth do right? God is a righteous God, and he will always do what is exactly right whenever he brings his judgment. We also need to bear in mind what we considered last week from verse 15. The fact that God is also a God of mercy and of grace. That he had a wonderful plan of salvation. In fact, it's interesting to note that verse 15 that we considered last week, the first proclamation of the gospel, God's plan of salvation, that actually comes before the verses that we're looking at here this morning, 16 to 19, which detail to us God's curse and God's judgment. God is, my friends, primarily a God of grace. And even though man sinned here at the beginning and brought God's curse upon himself, yet we see the grace of God shining through here. And even though God in his righteous judgment had to curse man here and creation as a result, yet God did have this wonderful plan of salvation that he announced to man. He was going to send a deliverer who would rescue man out of the clutches of Satan and sin and bring him back to himself. God graciously came to Adam and Eve there in the beginning after their fall, and he held out to them the hope of a final and glorious deliverance. Not only would Adam and Eve be delivered from the hands of Satan and be brought back to God, but they would also know God's complete deliverance of the entire creation someday as a result of the work that the Redeemer would do whenever he would come. And that is the great hope of the gospel this morning. We live in a hopeless world. A world, as we will see, is under God's curse and under God's judgment. But into that hopeless world, God sent the hope of the gospel. And that is why we have such confidence in the message of the gospel this morning. Why we can so freely proclaim it to the world around us. Because we know that God has a great hope for mankind and for men and women, even though they are under his curse and under his judgment. But even though God forgives sin through his promised deliverer, and even though he will bring that final glorious deliverance, man still has to face the consequences of his actions, the consequences of his sin and rebellion against God. That is why that we as believers still have to face hardships, difficulties, sorrows and troubles in this life, and even ultimately death itself. Even though we are forgiven, accepted by God, justified, we do still have to live with the effects of the fall. And that's why we have God's curse recorded here in these verses. So, two things here. We have God's curse, first of all, on the woman, and then, secondly, God's curse on the man. Let's consider, first of all, the woman's curse. Verse 16, at the beginning, it says, "Unto the woman he said, I will greatly multiply thy sorrow and thy conception. In sorrow shalt thou bring forth children." This is the first part of God's curse on the woman. This is a prophetic judgment that has been accurately confirmed throughout the long, sad record of human history. Women have always experienced troubles in bearing children, not only at the point of delivering a child, at the point of birth, but there are many challenges that a woman faces in regard to the whole process of bearing children. There are hormone challenges with hormones that begin in adolescence. There are the difficulties of a long pregnancy, and then the pains of actual childbirth. Pains which, by the way, no man ever dares to joke about. And also the hardships of motherhood last long after the actual birth. Caring for babies is an exhausting work, and raising children often takes an emotional toll. While children are a wonderful blessing from the Lord, and we rightly treasure them, but motherhood is hard and brings trials that last through the most fruitful years of a woman's life. If the question is asked why all of this trouble, sorrow, and hardship that comes with childbearing, the simple answer is here before us. It is sin and the resulting curse of God. Eve, the first woman, rebelled against God. God's curse, God's judgment upon her was that she would have sorrow and pain in regard to bearing children. Eve, remember, as verse 20 reminds us, was appointed to be the mother of all living. But now her children to all generations will suffer under the curse. Their very entrance into the world will be marked by unique suffering. They will be a continual reminder of the terrible effects of sin. Every time a woman experiences the pains of childbirth and the sorrows that go along with raising children, it's a reminder to her, and it's also a reminder to us of how tragic was Eve's action there at the beginning when she listened to the voice of the tempter and rebelled against God. And every time you see and every time you experience a woman giving birth and the pains that go along with that, and even with raising children, let it be a reminder to us that we have sinned against God, that Eve tragically rebelled against God there at the beginning, and this is the consequence, one of the consequences of her actions. But this curse on woman is not final. Her experience of giving birth in pain and in sorrow is a type of Christ, the promised deliverer, and shows the grace of God shining through here. Isaiah 53, verse 10 to 11 says, "When thou shalt make his soul an offering for sin, he shall see his seed, he shall see of the travail of his soul, and shall be satisfied." Christ labored in sorrow and in pain upon the cross to bring us to spiritual birth. That's a wonderful truth to think about. That's the very words that are used there by the prophet Isaiah. Christ would, his soul would travail and he would be satisfied. What is that satisfaction? that Christ would experience as a result of his travailing in sorrow and in pain there upon the cross. Hebrews 12:2 reminds us, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame. Christ could go through the cross and all of its sufferings that you and I will never ever know, what he experienced in his body, in physical sufferings, what he experienced in his soul, in spiritual sufferings. We will never know the depths of what Christ went through as his soul travailed in pain and in sorrow. But the writer of the Hebrews tells us that he was able to endure that for the joy that was set before him. And what was that joy? Jesus himself said in John 16:21, a woman, when she is in travail, hath sorrow, because her hour is come. But as soon as she is delivered of a child, she remembereth no more the anguish for joy that a man is born into the world. Isn't that so true? When the woman goes through the pains of giving birth, the joy that she experiences whenever that little child is born and she holds it in her hands, that joy causes her to forget, in one sense, the sufferings and the pain that she had to go through to give birth to that child. Friends, Christ willingly endured the pain and the suffering and the sorrow of the cross, being made a curse for us. Why? So that he could have the joy of seeing you and I brought to spiritual birth. Here we are as the children of God, those of us who are saved this morning. We are children of God. We have been brought to spiritual birth. And how were we brought to spiritual birth? It was through the travail of the sufferings and the sorrows that Christ endured upon the cross. You and I have the wonderful privilege this morning of being children of God, born again, born from above, having God's life within us, part of his family, because Christ travailed in pain and in sorrow for us upon the cross. Our spiritual birth caused Christ the sorrow and the pain of the cross itself. And not only us, but also all of creation. You want to turn to Romans chapter 8 for a moment. Wonderful passage there where Paul talks about the present creation groaning and travailing in pain. Again, the same language is being used as of a woman, what she experiences in childbirth. Romans chapter 8 and verse 19. It says, for the earnest expectation of the creature waiteth for the manifestation of the sons of God. Paul is saying that all of creation, the creation around us, is looking forward to, earnestly expecting, looking forward to the day of the manifestation of the sons of God. Verse 21. Because the creature itself also shall be delivered from the bondage of corruption into the glorious liberty of the children of God. For we know that the whole creation groaneth and travaileth in pain together until now. What Paul is saying there is, creation, being a part of man's dominion, was brought under the curse, as we will see from the next verses here in Genesis 3. The whole creation around us is under the bondage of corruption, Paul says. Everything around us in this world wears out. Nothing lasts. You buy a new car today, and in a few years' time, it starts to rust, and it has to be replaced, parts have to be replaced, and so on. Nothing lasts. Something that's brand new today, by tomorrow it's no longer brand new. It starts to wear out and doesn't last. There are natural disasters in our world. We're hearing of them more frequently in these days. Earthquakes, tsunamis, and hurricanes, and so on. That's the present state of the creation and the world around us. It's part of God's curse upon the creation, being part of man's dominion there at the beginning. But God has promised that it will be delivered from all of that someday. It's going to experience the glorious liberty of the children of God. Paradise is going to be restored, as we see in the final chapters of the book of Revelation. And that is going to be our glorious home forever as the people of God. That's what's going to happen someday at the glorious return of Christ. That is why we as God's people are earnestly looking forward to the return of Christ. Why we believe in his coming again. Why it means so much to us. Because we are in this present world experiencing all of these effects of the fall and God's curse upon the creation. We face trouble, we face sorrow, we face this bondage of corruption, as Paul called it, this deterioration in everything around us. That's our present state. That's the present state of our world. But one day Christ is going to come again. And when he comes again, he's going to restore the whole creation. The creation, as Paul says, is looking forward to the manifestation of the sons of God. And we're going to be a part of that glorious new world that Christ will bring in at his coming again. Every time a woman gives birth, there's a beautiful picture and reminder of God's promise of deliverance. The pain and the sorrow that a woman experiences in giving birth. It reminds us that we and the creation presently experience trouble and sorrow, pain and heartache, as the whole creation awaits the great delivery and birth of the new world as it were. But the woman's anguish is forgotten, as Jesus said, for the joy that a newborn child brings. A reminder of the joy that awaits us as the people and the children of God, when we and all the creation will be delivered and we will be a part of that glorious new world forever. Paul said in 2 Corinthians 4:17 to 18, "For our light affliction, which is but for a moment, worketh for us a far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory, while we look not at the things which are seen, but at the things which are not seen. For the things which are seen are temporal, but the things which are not seen are eternal." Is that where you are looking this morning? Maybe you're getting bogged down in this present world. Maybe the troubles and trials of life seem to be weighing so heavy upon you. Maybe at times you get up in the morning and you feel, how will I face another day? The problems and the struggles of life just seem to be so great. Well, Paul says, don't look at the things which are temporal, because friend, no matter how difficult your present situation is, it's temporal, it's passing away. We can look beyond it to the things which are eternal. Our light affliction, Paul says, our present affliction, as heavy as it might seem to us today, in comparison to the glory that awaits us, the glory that Christ is going to bring in when he comes again and creates all things new. In light of that, our present affliction is indeed light. And we can look forward to that exceeding and eternal weight of glory that Paul talked about. Are you caught up, my friend, with this present world? Or are you looking beyond it to the great hope that we have in the gospel, in what Christ has done for us? This whole world, in its present state, with all its troubles and trials, it's not our final home. One day we'll leave it all behind when we see Christ face to face, see him in all his glory. All of this is going to pass away. We will stand in his presence on a new glorified earth, paradise restored, everything made new, and we will rejoice with all the people of God, with all of creation, in what Christ has brought for us. Glorious things to contemplate and to meditate upon. So, this is the first part of the curse on the woman that affected her as mother. The second part of the curse on the woman then affected her as wife. Because the second part of verse 16 says, "And thy desire shall be to thy husband, and he shall rule over thee." What does it mean that the woman's desire would be to her husband? There are different interpretations as to what this means. Well, this is likely referring to the fact that the woman would desire to possess and to control her husband. Really, a rebellion against the order that God laid down in creation, which was that the man has the role of being the head, the one with the authority. That's what God laid down at the beginning. It's patterned on his own headship as God himself, the one who's ultimately in control and has the ultimate authority. The pattern of that God laid down in creation is that man has the position, the role of being the head. And this curse that is now being placed upon the woman here because of her sin, it seems to be that there will be a desire within the woman's heart to possess and to control her husband. The word desire there is used in the very next chapter in reference to Cain. In verse 7 of chapter 4, it says, if thou doest well, if thou doest not well, sin lieth at the door, and unto thee shall be his desire, and thou shalt rule over him. There's that very same word, desire, there. God said to Cain that sin would desire to control him. Sin would desire to master and control him, but that he would need to control and rule over it. It would seem then that this second part of the curse on the woman here was that she would desire to possess and to control her husband, but he would rule over her. Someone said, these words mark the beginning of the battle of the sexes. As a result of the fall, man no longer rules easily. He must fight for his headship. Sin has corrupted both the willing submission of the wife and the loving headship of the husband. The woman's desire is to control her husband, to usurp his divinely appointed headship, and he must master her if he can. So the rule of love, founded in paradise, is replaced by struggle, tyranny, and domination. We have in our day, I'm sure you're well aware of it, what's called the Women's Liberation Movement. And this movement will try to tell us that the solution to this problem is to abolish the man's role as being the head of the home, demanding absolute equality in all relationships, including legal, political, cultural, and personal. Really a direct defiance of what God has laid down for our good and for our blessing. God laid down at the beginning, for our good, for our blessing, that man be in the position of authority, that the woman submit willingly to that position of authority. Well, you see, what the women's liberation movement is trying to tell us is that we should do away with that. Do away with what God laid down. We should abolish man being the head, and we should all be equal. Men and women should be equal in every respect. Now, of course, these movements, these women's liberation movements and so on, they are justified in fighting against the injustices and the cruelties that male-dominated governments and cultures have inflicted upon women. It is an abuse of man's position of authority if he brings injustices and cruelties to women, and that should never ever be. And sometimes some of these women's movements start in protest against that, and that is good in itself. But what happens is that they carry those movements to anti-biblical extremes, and they demand equality in all relationships. When they do that, what they're doing is they are crossing the line into defiance of God. What is the true solution to this constant struggle that we see in our world? Man abusing his position of headship and woman rebelling against it. The true solution is not to abolish what God has laid down for our good, but rather the solution is the power of the gospel. You see, the gospel affects every area of our lives. And the power of the gospel is what will transform the attitudes and the ambitions of both man and woman. What happens in the gospel is that the Spirit of God comes into the heart of people and controls them. And when the Spirit of God and of Christ enters into the heart and controls the heart, that is what will enable wives to, as Ephesians 5 puts it, submit themselves unto their own husbands as unto the Lord. And the Spirit of God entering into the heart of a man is what will enable husbands to love their wives, even as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for it. You see, friends, how it is the gospel and the gospel alone that is the answer to man's need. That is what God intended and ordained for our good and for our happiness and ultimately for his glory. The reason why there is so much unhappiness in our world, so much unhappiness in marriages, and indeed so much breakup of marriages, is because we have abandoned what God ordained, what God intended. Men abuse their authority. Women seek to be equal with men, not wanting to be subject to their authority and to take the role of being a help in their leading. Who knows best, God or man? Man thinks he knows best. Man thinks he has the solution to these issues. But God alone, friends, as we see here in these beginning chapters of his word, God alone has laid down for us what is the true answer to our needs. God placed this curse, this judgment upon the woman. She would desire her husband, desire to control him, to manipulate him, to challenge his role of being the head of the home. And the answer to that is the gospel and its transforming power within the hearts of men and women. That's why we need to pray for people around us. As we look at people's lives, the unhappiness that's within them, as we see them rebelling against what God has laid down, we need to pray that the gospel will change and transform them, that the Spirit of God will come and enter into people's hearts, that they be born of his Spirit, and that when the Spirit of God controls the heart, then man will be able to fulfill his function in the way he ought to, as being the head, and the woman will be able to fulfill her role of being in submission to his authority. So that's the woman's curse. And then secondly, we also have here the man's curse. In verses 17 to 19, it says, Unto Adam he said, Because thou hast hearkened unto the voice of thy wife, and hast eaten of the tree of which I commanded thee, saying, Thou shalt not eat of it, cursed is the ground for thy sake. In sorrow shalt thou eat of it all the days of thy life. Thorns also and thistles shall it bring forth to thee, and thou shalt eat the herb of the field. In the sweat of thy face shalt thou eat bread, till thou return unto the ground, for out of it wast thou taken. For dust thou art, and unto dust shalt thou return. This curse on Adam, of course, included all of his descendants, all who were in Adam, including Eve, as well as everything that he ruled over, the whole creation. We're told there, cursed is the ground for thy sake. All the elements of the earth, the dust of the earth, out of which everything was originally made, all were brought under this curse, under the bondage of decay and breakdown. This is why, friends, we have all of the problems in our world. Why so many things go wrong. Why we are always contending with nature itself. It always seems to be against us. Life is a daily struggle for us. It's because the whole creation was cursed here as a result of man's sin. That is the only plausible explanation. Before man's sin, the earth easily cooperated with him whenever he tilled it and worked it. But now it became reluctant to produce its food. It started to produce thorns and toxic weeds that required toil and sweat and tears before man could eat of it. Then finally, after all his struggle, death would master him and prevail over him, his body returning to the dust from which it was taken. Is that not a perfect description of life in this world? A daily struggle for survival, and then after a short time, death catching up with us. Ecclesiastes 12:7, men shall the dust return to the earth as it was, and the spirit shall return unto God who gave it. Psalm 39:4, Lord, make me to know my end, and the measure of my days, what it is, that I may know how frail I am. That's a prayer we ought to pray every day of our lives. Lord, help me to understand really how frail I am. That all of my labours to survive in this world, they're all leading ultimately to the day whenever I will die and I will be no more as far as this world is concerned. That's something we ought to be continually reminded of. So there are four aspects to the curse on man here. One, sorrow that came from being continually disappointed and experiencing continual futility. Two, pain and suffering indicated by the thorns and thistles, things that hinder him in his efforts to provide for his family. Three, sweat or tears as a result of the constant struggle against a hostile environment. And four, physical death, which would eventually prevail over all his efforts. That's the reality of the world that you and I live in today. It's under the curse. That is why life is not all plain sailing. Don't expect it to be. We live in a world that is under the curse and the judgment of God. But remember, that is not the end of the story for the child of God. God promised the deliverer, Christ, the second Adam. And what happened to him? Galatians 2:13 reminds us that he was made a curse for us. Isaiah 53 verse 3, he was the man of sorrows. He wore the very thorns of the curse as his crown. In his agonies in Gethsemane, he sweat not merely drops of water, but drops of blood. Hebrews 5:7, he offered up prayers and supplications with strong crying and tears. And then in the end, as Psalm 22:15 puts it, God brought him into the dust of death. In other words, all that we have read about here in God's curse upon man, verses 17 to 19 of Genesis chapter 3, Christ, God's promised deliverer, when he came into this world, he willingly experienced all of those things. He took this curse upon himself. This curse that God placed upon creation and upon man there at the beginning, when he came, he willingly took that upon himself. And why did he do it? Why did he take all of that upon himself? It was, as Revelation 21 puts it, that the dwelling of God might be with them, and God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes, and there shall be no more death, neither sorrow nor crying, neither shall there be any more pain, for the former things are passed away. There shall be no more curse, but the throne of God and of the Lamb shall be in it, and his servants shall serve him, and they shall see his face. The complete reversal of everything that we read about in these verses in Genesis chapter 3. At the glorious return of Christ someday, and this is why we are so looking forward to that day, there will be the complete removal of the curse, the reversal of everything that happened here in Genesis 3. There will be the complete purging and renovating of the earth. 2 Peter 3, 10 to 13 says, "But the day of the Lord will come as a thief in the night, in the which the heavens shall pass away with a great noise, and the elements shall melt with fervent heat. The earth also and the works that are therein shall be burned up. Nevertheless, we, according to his promise, look for new heavens and new earth wherein dwelleth righteousness." Because we have this great hope in Christ and in the gospel this morning, we can be, as 2 Corinthians 6 and verse 10 puts it, sorrowful, yet always rejoicing. We can, as Romans 8 and 18 puts it, reckon that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory which shall be revealed in us. We can endure the thorn in the flesh through his all-sufficient grace and his perfecting strength. Then I tell you, this is the only way. This is the only way to face the trials, the struggles, and the difficulties of life. To keep before you that all that God brought upon, that all God pronounced upon the original creation because of man's sin, all of his curse, the troubles and the sorrows that we would face, and then death itself, returning to the dust. Christ came into the world 2,000 years ago. He took that curse upon himself, and as a result, one day the curse is going to be removed, and we are going to be a part of that glorious new world that Christ will bring in at his glorious return. What a comfort in the troubles of life. And the very earth, even though it's under the curse and the bondage of corruption, it daily testifies to this promised deliverance from the curse. Every night, think about this, every night the world descends into darkness and seems to lose the light of life. But the dawn always comes in the morning, and the sun rises to give that light of life again. Think about that. That daily occurrence is a reminder to us that very soon the Son of Righteousness will arise with healing in his wings. And what a morning that will be. What a day that will be. When my Jesus I shall see, when I look upon his face, the one who saved me by his grace, when he takes me by the hand and leads me through the promised land. What a day. What a glorious day that's going to be. Do you have the assurance this morning, dear friend, that when Christ comes again, he'll take you by the hand. He'll lead you through the promised land. All that Christ came and suffered and bore the curse to provide for us, that glorious new world to come. Do you have the assurance this morning that you'll be part of it? That you'll enter into that promised land someday and you'll share in that everlasting glory? If you do not have that assurance, even come as a sinner of Christ today. need to repent of your sin. You need to trust him. You need to put your whole faith and trust in that work that he accomplished for you when he bore the curse in your place. Trust him today as your own personal Saviour.